Let me introduce then who we have here. So Dave Challis, immediately on my left, Director of Global Sustainability EHS at Reckitt Benckiser Group. Dave's responsible for the Reckitt Benckiser Global Sustainability and EHS strategy and initiatives. We've asked Dave to come here because otherwise we're overwhelmed with retailers, and we thought we'd better have up on this panel somebody who actually has product. Great to have you here. Moving on immediately to one of our retailers. Helen Fleming is the Climate Change Director at Tesco Stores Limited, and is in charge of their award-winning supply chain programme, which won the Gigaton Awards with the Carbon War Room at their latest COP meetings, and also I think is top of the tables now at CDP. There we are. So Helen, delighted to have you on. Out of the FTSE 350. Yeah. Thank you very much. Then we have Harry Verhaar, and Harry is the Head of Global Public and Government Affairs at Philips Lighting. Harry obviously is our main sponsor here, but he's more than that. He is our solutions provider on the panel. So he has all the answers. The others have questions. Harry has all the answers. Then I have Gabrielle Ginér, who's a Senior Programme Manager on Environmental Sustainability from BT. Gabrielle, wonderful to have you on here. Gabrielle's responsible for developing and managing various programs on environmental sustainability at BT, but I think most interestingly and most importantly, she led the BT team that developed a pioneering methodology to estimate the carbon footprint of the communication services that BT are supplying to the London Olympics and to the Paralympics. So we're hoping we're getting free tickets. No. But anyway, we're great to have that. So Gabrielle is going to give us lots of perspectives, particularly on how you reach out into the supply chain as well. Next to Gabrielle, I have Jochen Lorenzen, Director of Finance and Production Control at B&W Mini in Oxford, which is obviously our hometown. So we're very delighted to have you here, Jochen. Thank you very much indeed. And we needed somebody who understood numbers on this panel. So all the really difficult questions about numbers and how you measure things are going to Jochen. Then we have John Elkington, who I'm sure an awful lot of you know, thinker, writer, futurist, arguably the person who invented the concept of the triple bottom line. We needed somebody here who had a perspective, a step back from business, who could give us a view on really what's happening across the board rather than just in our individual businesses. And so we're absolutely delighted to have John here, founder of Sustainability, founder of ENDS, and now more recently of Volans. So it's great to have John on the panel. And last but not least, I have Mark Rigby, Director of Corporate Communications at Sainsbury's. Mark is 26 years of commercial and communications experience, huge range of businesses you're involved in, Hutchison's, 3G, Six Continents, Bass PLC, and in particular, though, over the last 2 years, helped develop Sainsbury's 20 by 20 sustainability plan, raising Sainsbury's profile both internally and externally in the process. So please give them a hand of applause and welcome them onto the table. Right, so here are your questions. This is what you guys wanted us to help you with. So let's start with a nice broad one, shall we, around organisation and engagement. So there's a whole series of questions around aligning stakeholders and engaging stakeholders as a group. But one question I thought was very interesting came from Table L. Table L, put your hands up. Where are you, please? Over in the far corner. Which was, once you have the board engaged, how do you then engage middle management? So this is what a lot of people talk about as the marzipan layer or the treacle layer in an organisation. So Dave, you sort of volunteered to respond, at least initially, to this, and then we can involve the others as well.
I forgot about that one. I think for me, it's for when you've set your strategy, you've got your clear direction, you've got your leadership buy-in, it's around setting the right targets and putting the right things in place for middle management to just get on and do it. I think for me, appealing to hearts and minds is important, but that takes a lot of time. So setting clear targets. So for instance, at RB, we set a carbon target, and then as soon as that was launched, there were individual targets for our entire R&D community and our marketing community. So they know what to do.
And is it built into their remuneration?
That's built into their annual performance reviews.
Which then leads on to their remuneration.
Yes, so that's really important. So I think setting those goals, and for the marketing community, where it isn't always as easy to see those short-term sustainability benefits, actually putting things in straight away. So having in your 3-year plan, in your 10-year plan, there must be a sustainability element. Forcing that in to start with is a good way to get the conversation started without having to go through the soft engagement side of things.
Harry, what's your perspective on that? Middle management.
Yeah, I think when you talk about engagement, so first of all, don't wait till the board decides that this is a smart way to go. We're all part of real as well as of virtual networks. So our way maybe first to engage the board was to take an outside-in perspective, to show that we would rather be part of the solution, in our case mostly with energy efficient and more LED lighting. But to engage them was also to show and calculate in scenarios the business relevance. And then from then on you can involve any function in terms of what does it mean, making it relevant for them. So how much more attractive are you as a company in attracting new talent? How does it reflect into marketing? So having a compelling view and benefits that really your customers and communities would like to have. So I think in that sense, it sounds like like Einsteinian, but it's not. So it's actually, I agree with Jeff this morning in the panel. I wish the word sustainability was never invented, because it's innovation, it's marketing, it's attracting people, it's sales, it's turnover, and it's also ecological benefits that we mostly need. But in the end, we do this for customers. So in that respect, we also talk about lighting in terms of productivity and safety in cities, learning effectiveness in schools. And I think that goes a bit interactively, engaging, let's say, increasing engagement with all these different stakeholders.
Jochen, are the finance middle managers the most difficult to get on board?
The finance maybe not, but I think what we mentioned earlier, to really translate the strategy into realistic...
Could we have the volume up a bit for Jochen, please, Tim?
To translate the strategy into realistic targets in the middle management. So what we are doing in our mini plant is we are setting energy consumption targets for different areas and giving them to the responsible managers running the equipment, for example. And really making him responsible by measuring on a monthly basis how much energy, for example, he has consumed. And again, it's part of the target system and therefore part of the performance measurement. And my personal experience is these are the targets which are not difficult to argue, because most of the people say, yeah, there is a benefit in doing it. So really translate it into specific targets that the people can touch and feel is, from my perspective, quite important.
Can I just throw in the F word? Fun. Because I think if we were to step back at Sainsbury's, and it's not a plug because I mean every company has got this somewhere. One of the things that we discovered quite by accident, I suppose, was the sponsorship of Comic Relief or Active Kids, where you start out with a principle that seems very good and it's got the right ideals that you need to be able to promote sustainability in the areas you want to. But one thing it captures, I think to the early point about hearts and minds, it just gets inside people. So now, 11 years on, and with Comic Relief, all of the work that goes back across all third world countries and supplier countries, and therefore products, brands, manufacturing components, the whole thing goes right across the world. We just light the blue touch paper and stand back, and they get it. So I think fun is an important feature as well.
Helen, you.
Yeah, I was going to agree with everybody on the targets point, because you do need hard targets in any organisation. But one of the things that really strikes me is that it's amazing how the minute you say that this is the direction you want the business to go in, and you've got your top level people saying this is where we want to go, suddenly all those sort of silent little pockets of people or individuals who really care about the subject jump up and say, I want to do something. And you release a kind of immense amount of creativity if you can engage them really well in the business. And one of the things that we've done is we get our new graduates who come into the business to kind of join what we call a Green Champion scheme. And we give them permission to kind of think creatively about what to do in the business, wherever they sit, whether they're in commercial or operations or whatever. And it's amazing how many great ideas pop up just because people personally care and they want to make a difference.
Yeah, I'd just add to Helen's point a couple of things. One is, I think what we've noticed very important to have a vision that people get and that somehow makes sense to them. And also around champions, so we set up something called carbon clubs. So basically people in a local area or a building, you know, that care about these things would just stick up a hand and say, okay, I'm going to get a club together, which was a forum for where people could come together and discuss, you know, the big issues like climate change in the world, but also things that they could do in their buildings and issues that they felt could be dealt with.
John, you were...
Well, I was leaning forward for a couple of reasons. One is that people this morning have talked about behavioural change, and one of the things that people who do or try behavioural change find in whatever sort of organisation is that there are all sorts of barriers, and ultimately it comes down to culture. And it was quite interesting, Richard Parmenter from GSK this morning mentioned his daughter beating him up because he was working for a, I paraphrase, a criminal organisation. And one of the things that really strikes me, and maybe it's just I'm looking for it at the moment, is the way in which some leadership companies are starting to pull families into their business. So for example, Ian Cheshire of Kingfisher and B&Q has talked about how he's got people to bring their children into the discussion. I was in Nestle very late last year in Vevey. It happened to coincide with the day when everyone was bringing their children into the business. Why were they doing that? Because they want the children to understand the business. What did they get out of it? A very strong sense that a bunch of new issues are coming up the curve. There's a generational shift in politics. So I think if it is cultural, involving families is messy, a bit of a damn nuisance at time, but can actually be a way of shifting this agenda into a higher gear.
Okay, you know what's happening next time we do this, don't you? So let me put this back to Table L then. The panel almost made it sound easy. So why did you raise the question?
Yeah, we didn't actually know that this was going to be thrown back to us, so thank you very much indeed. I think that one of the things that was in our minds was this point that it is possible to make it sound easy, but I guess we were asking a question at a slightly more granular level even than the level that had been answered here on the panel. In other words, there are concrete measures that need to be put in place to make that stick in, as you put it, the marzipan layer. And I think some of the things that have been spoken about just now don't automatically have the same longevity, the same staying power in terms of bringing about that change. So I think what we've been grappling with on the table here are some very, very short-term concrete actions, and just wondering about, you know, what the other experience in the room was around those. I don't think any of us would disagree with the more general points that have been made on the panel.
Would you like to see if they've got any short-term...
Well, it'd be an interesting experiment, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, should we try? Gabrielle, you've done some things, I think, at BT, haven't you?
Well, one that works very quickly is bonus. You know, the remuneration, and you know, these are certain things that you need to do in order to get your bonus.
And so how's that structured then?
You put it on scorecards.
It's okay.
Yeah, so there will be, you know, this is what we want you to do, and if you don't do this, so if your unit doesn't, you know, get this energy saving, for example, then you will not be bonused. So you have targets to meet.
Okay, so it comes into the balanced scorecards that you're developing for a new... John?
Well, I was just going to say that in the Middle Ages, they used to hang bodies from the battlements to just show what was acceptable and what's not. And I heard an example from, as it happens, GSK just last week.
The children won't like that, though.
They love that stuff. I heard an example from GSK where somebody who had hit all of his performance targets in financial terms, but screwed up on the responsibility side, was sacked. And that sends a signal very, very clearly. If you do everything that the company requires you to do in financial terms, but you still don't address some of these wider issues, that goes the rounds quite quickly. I don't recommend it every day of the week, but...
I was just going to think, get it into your risk map. If you can build in, not all of it, but key elements that ask the question, what happens if we don't do this? And then build your risk planning across it. That tends to lend itself right to the middle core of management, because they're the folk that generally have to make it happen, or at least plan for the adverse of it not happening. So building it and integrating it into the risk planning process for sure.
Okay. So practical.
I think maybe also something that we did, have we made ourselves in a sense vulnerable, hopefully not to the punification that John is explaining. But in December 2006, we called for the global phase out of incandescent light bulbs. You might say that's a marketing argument, and that was a nice party and all that. But in essence, at that time, 2/3 of our sales volume was incandescent light bulbs. And we could see that if you're part of the solution, you need to switch, but also you need to prevent that you stick in, let's say in the past, even this week we saw a large photographic company filing for bankruptcy. So we didn't want to stick to the old technology. So in that sense, we are vulnerable because we made explicit what we stand for. At the same time, to make it a little bit more granular, for all our countries, and I've got some colleagues here, but also for all application areas, consumer lighting, schools, offices, we have set targets, then called green sales. So how much is the distribution between old and new technology? And the boards, they also, they reward or they punish based on those achievements, because we see this is for part, the main benefit is with our customers, but of course we want also to survive as a company. So we want to do good, but we also want to survive. So in that sense, I think it's relevant to make transparent what you stand for, and to have external, internal targets that can be measured, and where you track your own progress.
Okay. Yes.
Just to share one of the examples that we had in engaging our marzipan layer. I don't know whether you call the partners at PwC marzipan layer, but for us that was a key challenge, was how do we get the partners to really understand the sustainability challenge. And back in 2008 we put 200 partners through a 3-day program with Cambridge, which we co-developed, called the Forward Thinking Program. And so one of the keys was that it wasn't a sustainability training. It wasn't labelled as that, but in terms of the content, it was all about what's the world going to look like, and then if it looks like this, what does it mean for them as leaders of business of PwC, and what's it going to mean for your clients, and what does it mean, for your own families and future generations. So it was trying to touch those different levels of professional and personal as well. So as somebody who's been with PwC now since '99, I did notice a big change in the kind of what I call pull. So before I felt like I had to push a lot, and then all of a sudden there was all these people that wanted me to knock on their door. In fact, they were calling us. So that was one of our experiences on internal engagement.
Great. Anybody else got an experience of particular specific that's worked with middle management?
May I add one thing? So it's not about only setting targets, it's also making transparent the results. So if you give targets on energy consumption, for example, for various parts of the business, and make the results transparent, then you can get the same kind of challenge in the business that you have with other KPIs. So every part of your business want to be some kind of benchmark in quality, for example. So if you can get the same system for energy consumption, for example, you also can create some challenges and some competition. So did I progress? Did I make some improvements? So to get a certain spirit is then really helpful.
Okay. Now we had a very specific question from Table A, which was about what exactly did you do to engage employees around energy management, energy reduction? Gabrielle.
Yep, so this is, BT is a very large user of energy. We use 0.7% of all UK electricity. So we have an annual electricity bill of about £250 million. So this is quite key to us. So we did some research and thought that our employees could help us save about 1 to 3% of that bill. We've got about 6,000 buildings. So we launched a communications campaign through our central property unit and our energy unit, but we got each business division to sign up to specific targets. And these targets were around, we do an annual employee survey. So in that survey, we now have a question, which is, have you personally been involved in helping BT save energy in the past 6 months? So we've got a percentage target there that BT as a whole is supposed to reach. And we've had energy champions, so people who volunteer to look after a building or a specific area. They have support through various articles in all of BT's communications channels, posters, the usual stuff, competitions. We've just launched this in July. We're not quite on target on where we want to be on the people answering yes to the employee survey question. So we have now, going into our last quarter, targeted then, we can see which areas of the business where people are not as enthusiastic about this as some others. So those are being targeted specifically with, communications calls and trying to get people involved.
Right. We can also help you by changing the lighting.
Good one.
Good to see. So that's an example, I guess. You also asked on table A question about examples of positive cultural change in your organisation. As a panel, anybody else got examples like that, like Gabrielle's example of a specific area where you drove positive change? Yeah, Helen.
One of the areas that we focused on quite early in our carbon strategy was refrigeration, which is just over 20% of our overall carbon footprint. And whereas when you start looking at lighting and heating, there's kind of a built-in incentive in the business to reduce your use because it costs you money to light and heat your stores. So there's already a kind of discipline in the business to bring that number down. On refrigeration, when you're thinking about the switch from one form of very damaging refrigeration, HFC, to different forms of refrigeration, it's a really big transformation that you've got to make, and it probably costs you more money in the short term, maybe even in the medium term, to do that. So it's a really big change to make. So actually what happened with us was that we knew we had to address this as an issue because it was about 20% of our footprint. And we, the guy who was the guru of refrigeration technology, the engineer who was in charge of refrigeration, basically took ownership of the problem and said, okay, I'm going to go out there into the market and talk to everybody who's supplying this technology at the moment at whatever stage, and then try and come up with a long-term strategy for the business that makes sense financially, operationally, and for the carbon targets. And it's been a really long journey because it's actually not a very straightforward problem to resolve, especially when you operate in 13 different markets. But we're definitely getting there, and I think that's one area where we've managed to change a lot of attitudes within the business, and actually then we're talking to a lot of people outside the business who are users of refrigeration, who are beginning to see the possibilities in making the switch too.
And was this one individual who took it on themselves? Or?
Yeah, to a very large extent, actually.
Right.
It was, again, a question, one of those sort of empowerment things. You say to somebody, this is a problem that needs to be fixed, please go away and fix it, and they sort of get on with it.
Good Lord. Can't have too much of that, can we? Go, Harry.
Yeah, just a different example, and I think there will be more that can be shared. But it's also how do you involve your employees in certain fairly simple, but then still out of the box actions. So 3/4 of the electricity for lighting is not used at home, but is in buildings and in street lighting. And one area that is mostly very, very inefficient, also across Europe and across the globe, are schools. And of course, the quality of a school matters because we raise the next generation and we want them to be, from the start, a little bit smarter and not having to be brainwashed as we. So we have a lighting system, it's called School Vision, implemented in schools. It saves 50% of energy. It was researched, the first one in Hamburg, with a good German, robust researcher from the university. And it showed indeed that next to the energy saving, the reading speed went up by 40%, the spelling mistakes went down by 30%, and children were less restless by 75%. So also my son's school needs that. But what we did after that is also how on earth do you engage employees? How do you create momentum in society? So what happened last October is that in Holland, several thousand of our employees went to schools in Holland. They changed the lighting and they went into discussion with kids in the classroom. And suddenly, so they have an experience going back which is much, much richer than any internal assignment that you can give them behind their desk. So in that sense, I think you're combining something that will translate into sales, which can again be invested in innovation. But you suddenly have your internal ambassadors creating more momentum, and thereby then, I think also giving further push to the C-suite that this really, really matters.
Right, and Richard Palanter, talking earlier, was very keen on this idea that you talk differently to the people in the R&D labs to you do to the marketing And so somehow there's a translation that takes place. How does that happen?
I don't necessarily, and different environments and cultures will have different issues, I accept that, but I don't necessarily get that. Right. Because I've been doing communications 20 odd, as you said, 26 years, I'm quite young with it. But the thing I come back to is keep it simple and keep it in consistent language. Right. Because if you try and make it slightly tonally right for one audience, and another audience picks up that message and sees that you've made it more condescending because I wouldn't understand all that technical junk. You know, people are people. Keep the language the same so everybody understands that an apple's an apple, a pear's a pear, and we get it. I don't necessarily concur to that, but that's my view.
Anybody else got a... Yes, Helen.
I just think this is really, really hard. And actually, you know, the question sort of suggests that you are able to communicate with every single person in your organisation and get them to kind of buy into what you're doing. I'm not sure that's a realistic objective, actually. My business has got 500,000 employees, and I'm pretty damn sure that if I went into my local store and talked to, the kid from school who's doing his evening shift to earn a bit of extra money on the checkout, that he doesn't have the faintest idea of who I am and what I do and indeed what the business is trying to do. Does that matter? Not actually enormously in terms of making some of the really big progress you've got to make quickly. But it does, you've got to try, I think, but some of the practical problems are formidable as well. It's great if you work in a business where everybody's got a screen that they sit in front of every day. Most people in our stores don't have that, so our methods of communication with them are much more formalised, structured, and to be honest, it's all about, if you're in store, it's all about hitting your targets this week. It's about, why haven't we got the fresh produce or out on display quick enough? Why was our energy bill 10% higher than it should have been? Those are the kind of things they really focus on day to day, and they need to because, we've got to run the business first of all. So I just think it's an unrealistic expectation, certainly in my business, that every single person in the business is going to kind of know and care as much as me about what it is. Because to be honest, I don't know or care as much as them about, whether my distribution loads are landing in the right 5-minute slot or not.
Right. Well, maybe we should throw this back to Table I. Where's Table I? Who generated it? Where's your hand, Table I? So what's your view on this? Do you think you need to be able to communicate boardroom to boiler room? Do you want to give a microphone to Trevor?
Hi, I'm Trevor Payne from University College Hospitals in London. I understand the issue in Tesco's with scale. I mean, that's quite a challenge. But we're not all that big in terms of organisations, and I think it's about values, and it's about how you communicate those values and make it clear, make it simple. I agree, we need to make the message simple and make it relevant to different audiences as well. I don't think there's any magic bullet to it, and that's why we asked the question. We're keen to see if there's anything we can learn from the collective knowledge in the room and sort of take that back to where we work.
Right. And Table E asked a very similar question, wherever Table E is. Table E? Table E, at that end? Do you have a view on this? What's your kind of view about communicating to everybody?
Sorry, can you hear me? Is that on?
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's a very mixed view. I think really reiterated by the points made here is that some organisations are absolutely huge and have a very diverse range of whether it's business units or products that they actually sell in the marketplace, and other such as the universities are slightly smaller and probably easier to get the message across. I think one of the subjects came across is within the university is how do you actually get the facilities management company or the facilities management department who maybe are building a new block, who look at it in a very sustainable way, in line with the finance department who want the cheapest possible building built. But then again, you get the students who come along and maybe use 400 litres of water a day, which is way above the normal average. So how do you engage each part of that to achieve what you're trying to achieve going forward, was I think the point that came from our table.
Gentleman from Sarchies. There's a microphone just coming to you. If you put your hand up.
Another way of looking at it, in so much as we're making an assumption that the policy has been created from the top and we need to communicate it all the way down. Another way of looking at it is co-create it from the top down and the bottom up. where therefore employees get a sense of ownership and a sense of engagement in terms of implementing it, and make it easy. By that, we had a program to 1.5 million employees in Walmart. 1.5 million. We engaged 500,000 of them actively. It was called Do One Thing. That simplicity and consistency of that message, but it being the program itself being co-created by as many people throughout the organization, enabled it to achieve astonishing results. So I guess that's my thing: simplicity, co-create, get a sense of ownership throughout the organization, not just at the top.
Okay. So while we're on the subject of communications, there were a whole set of questions which I think picked up on themes in the morning that were raised about the challenge with the word sustainability. So I'd like to pick up on table D's questions, wherever you are, table D, over there somewhere, aren't you? D, yes. Said, are we using the wrong language in preaching to the converted? And do we need to shift from sustainability from being seen as an emotional, moral language and find a way in which we can express it in better business terms? That came from L. So, John, you volunteered for this one. Or maybe we volunteered you for this one.
I think I may have been volunteered. Let me just say a couple of ranging things or contextual things. I think sustainability as a word, and in many ways I agree with what people have been saying today, it's not effective language to use with many people in boards or C-suites or whatever. But if you think about the trajectory of that language, funnily enough, somebody sent me something an email during the lunch break, which was a spoof graph, which went from today, every paragraph has, somebody else has seen it, but has the word sustainable in it, and by 2015 it'll be every sentence, and by 2019 it'll be almost every word. That is not where we want to go. I mean, to me, sustainability is the sort of concept that would rank alongside freedom, liberty, democracy, quality, these sorts of concepts. And you don't use democracy, and you don't use freedom, and you don't use liberty. You might use quality in everyday intercourse within companies. So I think we have to understand what this term is for. And I think the problem we face at the moment, and many of you will have read the Accenture study a couple of years back, where 766 CEOs were interviewed on how they see this whole agenda. And 93% said, now we worship at the shrine of sustainability. 88% said, we know we've got to drive it through our supply chains like Walmart. But for me, the real shock was when 81% said we've already embedded sustainability. And that, to me, speaks of a fundamental misunderstanding of what we mean by that term. We do not mean a conservative agenda about keeping things as they are. We mean an agenda which basically means taking apart the economy that we inherited from the 19th and 20th century and building something fit for purpose in the 21st. Now, if people can agree on that definition, you'll spook the horses in boardrooms as well if you use that term. But I think that's what we're talking about.
Thank you, John. Any other, Harry?
No, maybe a way to look at what John mentions, and the redesign. So we can't expect people to read all those reports and letters to prime ministers. So also the vocabulary is really key. So one thing on generic vocabulary is, I think, if you look at what the issue that we're trying to solve, is we are the only species on the planet that acts based on lowest initial cost. So our behavior, a lot of our processes, like public procurement, but also the way we judge things as media, as voters, is like instant gratification. So we are the only ones, and here's then a new term, that live in a linear society. We extract, we consume, and we exhaust. Whereas it's much more, not only ecologically and morally and socially, but also economically just smarter to live in a circular society, not waste all those resources for the same amount of product and service, and actually finding that those will become better. And then coming back specifically, and coming back to the school example, is then we don't talk about a low-carbon school, because people will find that off-putting. But we also don't talk about a green school, because everything will be green one day, like sustainable. But also in the US, some people will not send their kids to green schools. But we talk about bright schools. And then as a parent, you don't have to read all the reports on learning effectiveness and whatever, but you think, hey, bright school. that says something about what the school offers. And then the school can be very sustainable and energy efficient, but in essence it's a more effective learning environment, and that's what counts. And in the same way, with Tesco, it will be a more pleasant shopping experience, and you will recognize the products. And that can be done in not too difficult ways. So I think in that sense, so the vision, in a little bit simple words, hey, circular society, I see a lot of people, also in other discussions, think, hey, that makes sense. But then also specifically, like bright schools or livable cities, see, hey, yeah, that's what we want. So without reading the reports, already having much more drive to make the right decisions, without being one of those few experts, which not all of us can be.
Can I ask Table D then, whether they think, in asking this question, that we are using the wrong language and preaching to the converted? What was your reason for asking it?
Hi there, Andy Cartland from Acre Resources here. I think we had a few different views on the table, but collectively we agreed that the word sustainability does create uncertainty, because it can, when we're all talking now about embedding, I think people are possibly referring to different things, whether that's issues around supply chain or resource efficiency or energy, or even health and safety now, which we see falling under sustainability. But a panellist earlier referred to seeing things through the lens of sustainability, which I personally think can be quite useful, because it can define a principle, such as things like freedom and other things. And if we weren't talking about sustainability, perhaps we wouldn't all be in a room together today. So there must be something which unifies it all together. Otherwise we'd be in an energy conference, a supply chain conference, a health and safety conference. So it's just getting to the bottom of what does it actually mean? What does the umbrella mean?
Okay. Anybody else got a view on the language and sustainability you want to share? Yeah, lots of people. I think panels is what they're here for.
I mean, for me, I think people just want to know how their activities contribute to the overall company goals. And so for a manufacturing employee, that will be about health and safety, energy, water and waste. For an R&D person, it might be more about thinking about the in-use phase for that product in a different way, because actually that's where the impact is. So thinking about, that's not talking about sustainability. You might have some, a cross-company sustainability communications campaign which is warm and fuzzy and brings it all together. But ultimately, people want to know how what they do contributes to what the business needs to do.
Right.
In my opinion.
Okay. Nice and tight.
And I was just going to say that I think the short answer is yes, because I think it's great to have conversations with people like Harry and John about, where the big strategic questions about where we need to get to in the long term. But I know that in communications with a lot of people in my business, I have to kind of get down to the basics of saying, in order to achieve this objective, I'm going to need to talk to you about how much money you can save as part of an energy saving project with a supplier or whatever. The reality is that a lot of people in our businesses are not at the same place on the curve of kind of understanding of sustainability. And to be honest, I don't mind if they're not. I just want them to do some stuff and to do some things that make a difference. And I'm happy to communicate that in whatever way I can.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, beware of fads. I started out with corporate social responsibility, then we dropped the social for corporate responsibility, then we played around, not the companies I work for, but just the language that we use. Biodiversity, what the hell was that? And if you're not careful, there's two things we just need to be mindful of. One, if you keep changing it, becomes a fad and people just think, forget it, sod it. And the second thing that I think we need to be mindful of is that it needs to say what it's going to do on the tin, the axiom of life. To the point that Helen just made, it needs to be exactly, and I think to your point, why are we in this room? Because we're all here trying to preserve the resources of life in the future, whatever it is. So I think you need to just bear in mind simplicity, but also consistency. For me, I don't particularly like sustainability, but I damn as well hope that the next 10 years we don't change it, because I've just spent 5 years getting people to understand what the bloody thing is.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of those people we've got to try and understand this bloody thing, the board and the C-suite. And there are quite a few questions from tables B, D, M and J here about the role of leadership and the board and the C-suite. And so I guess the first question I'd like to kind of throw to the panel that was raised here was, can you make it happen without a strong, committed leader? Go on.
That's
There
me,
there
is
you
it?
go. Well, you shook your head.
Justin King, Chief Executive of Sainsbury's. If I step back and say to myself, could we have achieved a number of the things that we've achieved in the last 2 years if he hadn't have been so determined, annoyingly so, on certain occasions, I have to admit, I don't think we could. You do need some bloody-minded focus that says we're going in that direction, for sure. The second thing I would say, and it goes back to the point about getting hearts and minds from the top of the organisation to the bottom, I think you need to take a step back and look at your brand. Because if your company is actually projecting a certain way of working, way of life, then that needs to fit into the way you're going to talk and be. So, I mean, it's a common sense thing, but you wouldn't expect, and I'm not picking out a particular industry, but I can use this as an example. A financial bank in this current climate would be at a very difficult position to say that we're going to change the world and we're going to invest into future living. Because most of society would be very uneasy about trying to ratify their preconceived ideas about the banking sector with any good work. The fact is that the banking sector are probably trying to compensate for what they've done and trying to rectify in some ways, probably merited. But to answer the question directly, God help us if you don't, because you get fragmented and everybody has a new idea and off you go. So, yes.
So I'm going to assume that tables B and D had at least somebody on each table who felt they were in a situation where they didn't have strong leadership to rely on. Or you don't have to say anything about this. I'm assuming that because otherwise why would you raise the question? So I'm going to ask the question to John, if I may. Do you know, with all the experience and exposure to organisations you've had, have you seen successes where the chief executive hasn't driven it?
Yes, to a degree, in the sense that if you go to certain countries, and at certain times in their thinking about all of this, Canada at one point, Denmark, the Netherlands, you have a cultural take on this agenda, and therefore employees can, for a period of time, drive local actions and so on. The model I have is that quite often if you look at the United States and you look at the period where the Republicans get in and they knock back the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, you then get a proliferation of state and local level standards. And at some stage, the federal government has to wade back in to try and make sense of the immense mess that has been created. And I think to some degree, that can be the dynamic that with some companies, you have the wake-up call going at the bottom up. And at some stage, it becomes so messy that somebody has to come and make it a bit more strategic. But directly to the question, I cannot think of a single company that I've worked in where the CEO and equivalents haven't both bought into this and driven it, as you say, over time and made a really bloody nuisance of themselves periodically. You have to have that. And ask yourself the question, why? Historically, it's because they've been whacked around the head by something like Shell or Nike or whatever it happens to be that came from the outside environment. Increasingly, it's coming in from inside, and it's operating on a peer-to-peer basis. CEOs are switching on other CEOs.
But there's also a danger in that, as much that if you have a CEO or chair or finance director that's in tenure for some time, you get personal little hobby horses, which, if you're not careful, can overrun the pure ethos of what you're trying as a company or a culture to achieve. So, you know, there's the balance of the two. Right. And somehow you need some governance that can recognise when that's happening and be able to cut in and say, actually, I hear you, but no, the way this company is going to behave and move forward is in this direction, not that. And then you get to really interesting challenges.
So let's take the position then that the chief executive's involvement is important. Go on, sorry, Helen first.
Well, I just wanted to say this is absolutely not about my Tesco experience, but my previous life in government, where actually sometimes a bit of strong leadership from the top can be really counterproductive in some ways, because they can drive new systems, new processes, new KPIs, whatever, to make things happen. Actually, nobody in the rest of the organisation thinks they're any good at all. And the minute they get a chance to undermine them or get out of them or find some way to just sort of sneak around them, they will do it. And there's it's great to have fantastic leadership, but you can't just have that. You need the organic stuff in the business as well.
You need the bottom up as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's just stick though to the chief executive and the C-suite. So there's some other questions here about, tell us how your CEO got sustainability and were you involved? So this is from table M. So I don't know if, Dave, you got a kind of, can you answer that? Can you take the credit for what's happening at Reckitt and Benckiser?
No. A lot of, at RB, a lot of, well, I'd say almost all of the success was due to the previous CEO having that vision and really thinking about sustainability and, I don't want to use the word embedding because it's been overused and criticised, but actually kind of kick-starting the organisation thinking about sustainability.
Right.
And I think now is a really interesting time within the organisation. We have a new CEO, we have new leadership, we're looking forward, and I think there is the opportunity for the CEO to kind of consider sustainability and what that means going forward. I think it can't just be the CEO, it's got to be the rest of the organisation, and now is the point when you're looking at future business strategy, you've got to then provide your leadership with the right ammunition so they can make the right decisions. So it's not just some evangelical, I've seen the light, we need to be sustainable, it's how can this topic support the business and where it wants to go.
So what, Helen, what was it that got first Terry Leahy and then Phil Clark buzzed up about this?
Well, Terry, I mean, I only arrived in the business 2 years ago, so I don't have a great deal of insight into that. Actually, I mean, the story that gets told is that it was actually about his kids.
Right.
He got the nagging from his sort of young teenage children at the time. Oh, there's a man over there waving.
Can you turn it up?
It's Terry Leahy's son, actually. He's going to tell us who's over.
So the story that I heard was that it was Terry Leahy's kids who sort of said, well, you know, what did you do during the war, Dad, or whatever teenagers say to you. But and that was one of the things that got him switched on to it, and then drove, you know, a very strong, personally led approach. Phil, it was interesting, you know, he came into the business, or he'd been in the business the whole of that time, took over the leadership last year. I think coming at it from quite a different point of view to Terry, you know, not that sort of strong gut feeling, I don't think, but he went, actually we spent a day with him before he took over at Manchester, at the University of Manchester, who we have a relationship with the sustainability, the Sustainable Consumption Institute. I was about to give the wrong name then. And we spent a whole day kind of talking to them about the challenges around sustainability. And he sort of went away going, yeah, actually, there's something really going on here, isn't there? And this wasn't just a sort of pet hobby horse of Terry Leahy. So after that, he really strongly supported kind of making sure that we carried on with that strong legacy.
So within Philips, we have a lot of people who work on sustainable challenges on energy efficiency. On the lighting part, I'm fortunate enough to be able to take credit, but let's also, for CEO involvement, recognize that they're only human. So one thing that happened, so when we built this whole vision of how we could be part of the solution, how it benefits our customers, but also how it could impact the top line, is that in October 2005, we had a first external event. And we had a new innovation on street lighting, actually also widely used in the UK now. And I said to our CEO, yeah, we need to go out. We need to go to Brussels, have an external event. By the way, it was in the end with Chris Davies from the UK. And with 21 journalists, said, we'll go there and we'll, for the first time, we'll also share some numbers. How much lighting can save, how much carbon it is, how much money, how many power plants. Also very important discussion today. And he said to me, and I didn't report to him, he said to me, and of course we're Dutch, so we let's say we don't work always in a hierarchical way. He said to me, Harry, should I go there to Brussels? I said, yes, Theo, you need to go. So he went with me, he presented the whole story, he threw in the numbers, and it's only 6 years ago, less than 6 years ago. And can you imagine, that was the journalists, they picked it up. So he held up an old lamp and a new lamp, and journalists started making pictures. He was on the internet, and then what I mean with the human element, he was addicted to the attention. So I could, from then on, every time just barge into his office and say, Theo, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It was just amazing. So what I'm saying, yes, of course, we need to sell the business relevance. Let's not forget the business relevance relates to how this is relevant and beneficial for your customers, how it improves their lives. But in the end, they're only people. So when you expose them and they get into the media and on the web, they love it because it's addictive.
Okay. Gabrielle.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that point. One of the things that we see is customer requirement. So we have our customers saying, we want to buy from a company that we see as sustainable. So, for example, the likes of Unilever. So when we go into business to bid situations, we have to make sure that we can prove those credentials. So that tends to work quite well with CEOs and the like. Is that if we don't do this, we are not going to be competitive. The other thing is around the business opportunity of sustainability. So I guess we're fortunate in a way in the ICT sector, but we are launching a sustainability practice. We have sustainability products like telepresence, for example, that will cut down on carbon, and we're looking into energy management systems and things like that. So there's definitely money to be made in this space.
Great. Okay, an important one. I was going to ask Jeff. Would you mind if I ask you about Paul Polman, and how did he get it? And when did he get it? And what was the thing that drove him? You can say no if you like. I've just sprung it on you, but
no, I think it's probably not the same story as Terry Leahy, but I think it is about where Paul, the way he grew up, the environment that he grew up in. It wasn't easy. It was difficult. He came from a fairly humble background, with a father who worked very hard. I think he had huge impact and influence on him, and with a kind of attitude of trying to make the world a better place. And I think that's where it stems from.
But was there a moment when the light came on for him? Was there something that?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. He arrived in Unilever with this view. So whether somebody from Procter or Nestle knows him better than me,
right?
But
he came with a view. John.
I'm not going to pick up directly on Paul Polman. I think it's deep wired in him clearly as an individual. But let me just take an instance. Is there anyone here from Nestle? No hands that I can see. But
does that mean it's safe to say what you're going to say?
No, because we're being filmed at the same time. So I sit on an advisory board within Nestle. It's called the Creating Shared Value Advisory Board. Both the chairman, Peter Brabeck, and the CEO, Paul Bulke, are on that advisory board. And what really strikes me, and I think it's relevant to the discussion today, is that you really can't use any particular language and hope to sort of cross-apply it to every corporate context in which you work. You have to go where the CEO or equivalents are. And in the case of Nestle, firstly, they've been whacked around the head for a very long period of time. So in a sense, they were, for quite some time, on the defensive and actually not terribly welcoming engagement with this wider world. But then a series of things changed. And I think one of the things that changed was they suddenly became aware that they had this Achilles heel, and Coca-Cola and others are in the same place, around water. And now they have just three priority areas: water, rural development, and nutrition. You talk to anyone in the company, at least at senior levels, and they understand those priority areas, and they understand that they're strategic. They don't terribly like to use the word sustainability. They do use shared value, the Michael Porter, Mark Kramer concept. And I'm as wary as you are, Mark, about fashions. But no, times change, and people like some new terms to sort of bandy around. And personally, I like the shared value language. I think it's quite a powerful tool.
Right. So I'm just going to ask Table M, where they put forward these questions. Where's Table M? Table M? Table M? So did you have a particular take on this? You need a microphone just coming. I think there's one coming. Jogging to you now.
Yeah, hi, Simon from The Body Shop. I'm lucky to work for an organisation who's normally had that kind of top-level buy-in. I guess we hear a lot about these kind of road to Damascus moments, and realistically, not every CEO in the FTSE 250 is going to have that road to Damascus moment. So the point behind the question, I think, was, what happens if you work for one of those organisations? Right. And are there any ways to engage the CEO, or can you do it without the CEO?
Right. Okay, well, that leads us nicely on to the question that also came from Table J here for the panel, which was, do you have any tips on how to move the board and the CEO to sustainability? Do you have one or two things which you think really can say? Maybe we can just kind of run through, and you can say no if you want, don't worry. But we want to start at this end. Dave, do you have any are there any tips to engaging the board
or the CEO that you think would work?
The thing that's been working quite well for us recently is splitting topics into those which will or have the potential to generate competitive advantage and those which are the hygiene factors or have the potential to have competitive disadvantage. So it's very easy for senior leadership to think about things like health and safety, facilities, kind of compliance type issues in one way, and then the slightly more difficult topics which they need to spend more time thinking about the future of their brands, their products, their operations in the competitive advantage box. I think that works quite well. It means you can get the hygiene factors out of the way because they are, in my opinion, simpler to understand, set targets and programs for, and then spend more time focusing on the business and the future and how sustainability can contribute to the future of the business.
Helen?
That's a really good one, so I'm going to agree with that one. But the other thing I'm going to say is keep it simple, actually. If I look across the people who sit around the executive table when I go and talk to them, they're people who are responsible for some really difficult, practical things, and that's kind of what takes up 99.9% of their headspace. And so they don't have a lot of time to think about the lovely paper that I've written on them with beautiful graphs and, charts about how the world's going to end in 10 minutes. And, you've got to do something about it, guys. You need to give them really simple, clear messages about why the business can make a difference and a couple of key things that it can do to change. And then, the next time you go and talk to them, you'll take them to the next one on the list. And just keep on going back with simple, clear messages, and they'll get it because they're smart people. They just don't have an awful lot of time to think about this stuff.
Right.
I think in 3 senses, show how it has relevance. So how does it have relevance for society and for your customers? How does it have relevance for our living environment? And how does it have relevance economically? So as a company, of course, in your results, but also for communities, for cities. Half of a city's budget is electricity. Half of a city's energy budget is electricity for lighting, but also on a country level. And I'd like to give one example there. And I think you sense, I don't know if the word Europe is a no-go area here, but then what we are really afraid of, and not just us, but also a lot of other large companies in Europe, is that with the current budget deficits and the Euro debate, that European politicians, they find another excuse to do nothing and to flee forward. That they would say, energy efficiency, buildings. Unfortunately, the UK is taking a good position there. That's really difficult. Let's go for renewables because we now have all these other headaches. And I think also there we have a relevance not only to show how it matters to you, but also how it matters in an interconnected way. And for instance, just going back to lighting, because I just know that quite well, it can save 30 billion euros in European electricity cost, but also that's equivalent to 140 power plants. So that's about 300 billion euro. And I would guess about 6 of that, like 15% is in the UK. Power plants you don't need to construct. So that would make, let's say, that would relieve the budget. So what I'm saying is every time, also this external relevance is dynamic. So it changes, connected to that, but in those 3 areas, for your customers, for the living environment, and for the economy in different levels.
And presumably photo opportunities.
Yeah.
That was the one I was going to add, actually. I mean, I think just adding to what people have said, competitive advantage, relevance, and I guess to try and figure out how can this make them look good, right? What is it? Yeah, is it the photo opportunity that they want? Do they want to be seen as an innovator? Do they want to be seen as a visionary? What is that, and make it relevant to your person, I would say.
I would try to give the question a different pitch. In my business, I actually don't need to convince my CEO that this is crucial. He knows it, and the whole management team knows it, and it's part of our strategy in BMW. Because if, as an automotive manufacturer, you're not looking on sustainability, you will be dead soon. So from that perspective, that's not the point. But what can we do then to make it happen, and not having it just written in some strategies? So I think we should not only look at, is the CEO buying in? We should look, what can we do to give actions, to give measures, to give proposals to the board to decide on sustainability measures. And this is for me the even more important question. do we have enough measures? Do we have enough actions? Do we bring them to the table, or is already someone on a very low level deciding on his own, oh, they will not approve it anyway because there is not a business case or something like this? So are we really in the position that we get all the creativity that is in our business on the table and transform it into activities? This is, from my perspective, a very crucial question. So I wouldn't bother about the CEO. I would bother about our internal processes to get activities in place.
Couple of observations. One is Nike were in the office yesterday, and one of the things that Hannah Jones, who many of you will know, was saying was that having been an arch champion of transparency for many years, she's now going into stealth mode because all of this is becoming strategic, so that there's a bunch of stuff that they're innovating around, which they don't want to communicate very widely to the wider world. So I think we're in one of these phase change moments. It's not true of every sector, and it's not true of every geography. I just have two ideas. One is get the buggers out of their comfort zone. I mean, C-suite people, board level people are very comfortable where they are, thank you very much. Put them out where the future is. One of my favorite science fiction authors, William Gibson, used to say, the future's already here, it's just not yet evenly distributed. Take them to where it is, take them to where it's evolving. And so late last year I was involved in an extraordinary event in Nairobi, where Barclays took over 100 of their top executives from around the world and exposed them to slum conditions. It was quite remarkable, the impact that had on those people. And Leaders Quest, who organised that, I have an immense respect for. The second idea is much harder to execute effectively. Body Shop bought by L'Oreal, Ben & Jerry's bought by Unilever. In fact, I was written into the contract of sale of that company to Unilever as a guarantor of their values. Danone bought Stonyfield Farm. Problems on just about every front. You can't buy your way completely into the future. Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's, for example, got $5 million to try and spread the Ben & Jerry's values inside Unilever, and that didn't really work out as planned. So difficult to buy the future, but you can buy into it through other mechanisms. And I think one of the interesting things that Unilever has done is to get involved in a venture capital outfit in California called Physic Ventures. And they're in that alongside people like PepsiCo, CalPERS, CalSTRS, some of the big pension funds. And they're doing a bunch of things collaboratively. And unlike most corporate venture funds, the outputs won't necessarily be used by Unilever. They may be spun out or sold on to other people. But I think there's some interesting new models coming up like that. Mark.
Thank you. Excuse me. We didn't have the problem of getting the board on board with sustainability. Our problem was the board were all on board with sustainability. So you have 12 or more different views about where we should be going and what we should be doing and how quickly we should be getting there. So the suggestion that we did, and I'm holding it up as the evidence, I think you introduced me as the 20 by 20 sustainability plan, we did materiality. So we actually asked all the key stakeholders, including customers, thousands of people, what matters. And we came up with the top 20 biggest things that we then published. And my last point after materiality is publish them, because then everybody has the same accountability. You're all looking at the same words. The language is the same. The tone of voice is the same, and you're being counted. And we published that in October of last year. And there's some of these things in here, I'm not trying to be clever, I haven't got a clue how we're going to achieve. But we do know that's the direction we're going in.
Right, thank you. Interesting. Okay. Time to switch to a different area of topic. We had lots and lots of questions around the supply chain. Not surprisingly, a lot of you are interested in that. So I thought it'd be come back in on some of those questions before we come to the end for the last 10 minutes. So how do we build engagement in the supply chain? Perhaps I can start with Helen and Gabrielle. How do you build these things?
So we have a climate change questionnaire that we send out to our suppliers, basically to monitor what they're doing on climate change. There are 3 key questions in that where we ask, do they have a climate change policy? Do they have reduction targets? and do they manage and measure their carbon emissions. So based on that, we can kind of see who the laggards are. And what we did last year was we decided to target those companies. How could we inspire them to take action on climate change? So we invited them to one-day workshop that we did together with the Carbon Trust, and basically talked about why climate change was important and sustainability was important to BT, some of the things that we were doing, but then really went into practical examples of what companies could do. And most of these companies are SMEs, so we tried to tailor it to them. Before they left the workshop, they had to sign up to an action plan, which they then had to go back to their companies and discuss, within those companies. And then we would monitor actually and phone these suppliers every 3 months to see how they were doing against the actions that they had signed up to. After all that, we launched a new climate change standard in March. Basically, now every supplier that wants to do business with BT have to do those 3 things that I mentioned. They have to have a climate change policy, they have to measure and monitor their emissions, and they do have to have reduction targets. So we have our target this year is to get 80% of our suppliers to say yes to these questions. And we're just monitoring. It's now become a how you do business with BT requirement.
Thanks. Well, work in progress, I'd say, for Tesco. We set ourselves the target of reducing the emissions of the products we sell by 30% by 2020, and we set that target just over 2 years ago. We've sort of tried different approaches and are still trying different approaches, not least because, and Mark will be familiar with this, we sell about 70,000 different lines in our stores, from your basic commodities to some quite highly sophisticated consumer goods. And the way in which you engage your supply chain for those different products is very different depending on what the products are and also where they come from. So we source an awful lot of non-food from China, where you have to start sometimes with some quite basic things about energy efficiency rather than jumping straight into what the the fantastic latest bit of technology that Philips has got to offer and how LED lighting can help. What's worked, I think what's worked, and there'll be people out there who are in our supply chain, and you can say whether you think this is right or not. The things that have been more successful are actually, the collaboration that we've done with 2degrees on the Knowledge Hub that we've set up, which is a virtual space where people can talk to one another about their experience of dealing with these issues, what's worked, what hasn't worked, has kind of set up this rather interesting set of peer group contacts, which is great because people learn much more quickly, and they'll talk to one another about experience of particular technologies that have worked or not worked, and you spread knowledge much more quickly that way. So that's been very good. I think we've had some great engagement with the people who you would assume we'd have great engagement with. So the really big brands who are already into all this stuff and doing a lot of work, were beating down our door the minute we said that we were doing this to come and talk to us about how they could share information with us, how we could work on customer communications together, and we've done a bit of that. Where I see the sort of next set of challenges is we've got a great group of really committed companies who are dying to join us, and they're all really on board, and it's fantastic. We've now got to expand that out into the people who either find it all a bit of a challenge and a bit difficult and haven't quite beaten down my door yet, or the people who, for whom this is just not an issue at the moment. And Gabrielle talked about the way that she's done it. I think I would like to have a supply chain like Gabrielle's where I could sort of go down to each level quite easily and be able to set standards and say, you must do this in order to operate with us. To be honest, my supply chain's a bit too complicated for that. But I'd say that it's about just keeping on, bringing more people into the fold all the time, and showing suppliers who've not traditionally worked in this areas the benefits that they can get from doing good things in this area by actually looking at some people perhaps in different sectors. Sometimes, just that little competitive Spur can help them. You know, "Ooh, that's interesting. We were talking to a producer of, you know, cucumbers the other day, and they're doing some very interesting things." And they sort of go, "Ooh, we ought to be doing that." So all very difficult, but those are some of the things that we're doing.
It's a journey. It's a journey. Dave, do you have a...
One little extra thing, it's quite tactical, but what worked really well at Kimberly-Clark was supplier awards as well on top of all this. I mean, you can put requirements in contracts and you can set specific goals and whatever, but some of the best and most interesting projects came from these supplier awards, supplier sustainability awards, the CEO having a nice event, worked really, really well in actually promoting innovation in areas that you wouldn't have expected it. So, and that's pretty easy and quick to do as well, just as an extra.
Mark, do you have a... At your end? I do pass you down the...
I think I really did relate to a lot of the comments that Helen made. And I think for us, the sustainability plan that we've published is absolutely vital, I've learned in the last 6 months with suppliers, because they can read and see and understand where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing. That's a major benefit. Of course, there's always going to be tension between certain products or value, cost, you know, all that kind of stuff, which you still need to address. But being open and transparent for sure. The other thing that Helen mentioned, which I related to, was peer groups. We had an example in the dairy industry, which, if you go back 5, 6, 7 years or so, milk in the UK was a pretty poor business to be in because it was so volatile in terms of pricing. And we came up with an idea of putting 325 dairy farmers together and try to get them to share best practice and talk about sustainability and carbon audits. At the beginning, you can imagine that there was the door, and I think they'd like us to go through it. But towards the end, and we're still in it, but the point I'm going to make is, by the fact that we were being open and one person sharing an experience of another to help drive down cost, help become more sustainable, we're delighted that the average saving that group has helped themselves with a bit of central coordination is on average £16,000 a year, which if you're a small business and a farm, that's a lot of money. And it's literally the sharing of best practice, which is, you know, don't underestimate that by far.
John.
Inevitably, we're surrounded by people who are professionals doing wonderful work. But what happens if you start to do all of this stuff, you rattle your supply chain, and for example, your Unilever and Indonesia really don't like what you're starting to do on sustainable palm oil? Unilever's top brass, as I understand it, have been called in by the Indonesian government and basically asked the question, are you serious about sustainable palm oil? Because if you are, it's going to cost you politically. Now, I just put that on the agenda because I think if you really do have an impact on your supply chains and you're trying to drive changes that are seen as political, you're going to get into politics. And I just conclude with a recent example where China clearly does not like being pressured to do very much at all by the wider world. And there's a real problem there with hazardous chemicals. Greenpeace, as you know, launched their detox campaign against a series of sportswear brands, trying to sort of spur competition. And what happened was something that Greenpeace didn't expect, which was that Nike, Adidas, Puma, C&A, H&M, Li Ning, China-based brand, got together, and they're now working on a way to sort of collectively help pressure China over the period to 2020 to go for zero discharge of hazardous chemicals. Now that's unusual at this stage. I'll bet you in 5-6 years we'll see a lot more of that.
Lovely. Okay, well, we're come to the end of the time for the panel session. So please, we just thank our speakers